As I told you before, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us tonight our President, 26th President of the United States, Mr. Theodore Roosevelt.
We have time for a short speech.
Absolutely. Please sit down. And we'll ask you some questions. You have your speech in your pocket.
It would have only taken 90 minutes or so.
Okay. They're not going anywhere. We blocked the door.
A long speech saved my life, once you know.
We'll hear about that. Sit down. Well, let's get started, sir. Mr. President, I understand that you and your brother saw Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession in New York City in 1865.
We did. We were lucky enough to be at my grandfather's house there on Union Square. And we perched in an upper window and watched the procession go by. Magnificent. 18 gray horses pulling the massive hearse. The somber beat of the drums, thousands of marching troops. A great send-off for a great man. And I am very honored to share a mountainside with him.
Very true. Very true. Another great man. Is it true, sir, that you have a great, excellent memory?
Not so much anymore. Advanced age and too much boxing. You know, now I think they call it head trauma.
I know people would like to know this, sir. Mr. President, could you clarify your relationship between Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, and yourself?
Well, Franklin was the son of my fourth cousin, James Roosevelt I. And so that would make him my fifth cousin. Eleanor was my brother Elliot's daughter, so she was my niece. And I actually presented the bride at their wedding in New York. Later on, Franklin would be the 32nd president of the United States.
Very good. I know a lot of people have always been wondering about that. I know I have. Sir, they say that you are blind in one eye. Could you tell us how did that happen?
Yes, a lot of people don't know that. When I was governor of New York, I boxed on a daily basis with various sparring partners and carried that on into my White House years. Well, one of my partners hit me very hard on my left cheek, detached my retina, and left me blind in that eye. I managed to muddle through with nobody discovering my secret, and later on took up jiu-jitsu instead.
I see that your activity has continued on.
Yes, it has.
Very well. Is it true that you drink coffee by the gallons?
I love the stuff. In the morning, I have a nice large cup of coffee that's half coffee, half milk with 5 to 7 lumps of sugar. The rest of the day, it's black for the other 30 to 40 cups, but I carry on with the same amount of sugar. Later on in life, I found that I needed to switch to a saccharin sweetener because I didn't want people to think that I was that layabout William Howard Taft.
Obviously, he was very close to the bathroom at all times. Sir, Mr. President, I understand that you were called a badass. Can you give us an idea how you got that nickname?
Well, there's a couple of stories during my lifetime, I'm sure, that helped give me that name. I went into a saloon in Mingusville, North Dakota, when I was living out west, wanting to have a libation at the end of the day. A drunk patron there fired several shots at me, put his gun in my face, called me Four Eyes, and ordered me to buy the bar around. I thrashed him severely, beat him into unconsciousness, drug him to a shed outside, and locked him in until the next day. Later on, wanting to navigate the Missouri River, some friends and I bought a clinker-built boat to do that, and some ruffians stole the boat from us. We spent 3 days building a new boat, pursued them downriver, caught them, and then it took 8 days travel to navigate the river back. Once we got back, it was in my right to hang them, but I assumed my duties of deputy sheriff and locked them away instead. And then there's the whole San Juan Hill thing.
We'll get to that later. In fact, let me bring that up. We understand you went out of your way to recruit different types of people for the Rough Riders. Can you tell us about this process?
Well, I had resigned my office of Assistant Secretary of the Navy, so I sent out a letter asking for volunteers for a cavalry regiment that Colonel Leonard Wood and I were going to start. We set up our recruiting post at a place called the Minger Hotel in San Antonio, there on the patio. And we had all types come in. We had Ivy Leaguers, we had Scions of Eastern families looking for adventure. We had cowboys, we had sheriffs, we had Plains Indians, all make and manner, all wanting a taste for adventure, but they had to be hardy fellows and they had to know how to ride a horse. We trained very hard there at Camp Riverside in San Antonio, and then in the evenings it was my tradition to buy my men a keg of beer or two at the Minger's bar. Colonel Wood frowned upon that immensely and lectured us about it constantly.
Speaking of the Rough Riders and San Juan Hill, can you give us a brief story of your famous charge up San Juan Hill?
We were tasked with taking San Juan Heights so we could have a coordinated land and naval assault on Santiago de Cuba, which San Juan Heights overlooked. Early in the battle, I was told that General Wood had fallen. So I rode to the fore, rallying my troops, who, by the way, could not take their horses up the hill. And I became entangled in barbed wire with my horse, so I dismounted and we all charged Kettle Hill at first. We beat the Spanish there, and then to the right of Kettle Hill was San Juan Hill. We went down Kettle and up San Juan and cleared the Spaniards from there and secured the heights. They said it was a brave charge. I say it was foolhardy, but it worked.
And they do pay.
And made me famous.
As part of the Spanish-American War, how did the U.S. come in possession of the Philippines?
Treaty of Paris in 1898. Spain gave up all rights to sovereignty for Cuba and departed. They ceded to us Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Now, we had to pay Spain $20 million compensation for the cession of the Philippines. And that's how we came into possession of that.
Well, that must have been quite a surprise for the Filipino people. Were they pleased with the United States being involved in their country?
Some of the elite were, yes, but there was a faction that had expected the Philippines to gain independence like Cuba did, but that did not happen, and they were not happy. That faction fought a war with us from 1899 to 1902. And during that war, nearly 250,000 civilians died from disease and famine just because of that war. But before the end of the war, we set up a civilian government with William Howard Taft as the governor general. He was appointed by President McKinley. And the Filipinos had an elected assembly to represent them. And their own courts, by the way.
So it ended up very well for the Filipinos.
Yes, it did.
Speaking of your political life, is it true that the Republican leaders in the country did not want you as the president?
No. People like myself and Williams Jennings Bryan, progressives, they did not like our ideas about monopolies, trusts, the robber barons of the time. And the Republican National Committee, powers that be, along with J.P. Morgan and John Rockefeller, just to name a couple, decided that they would try to pigeonhole me in the vice presidency. And that way, they would kill my political aspirations for good. Little did they know that a few months later, President McKinley would be assassinated, and I would have my day in court.
Very good, sir. Mr. President, you were the first president to get a Nobel Peace Prize. Can you tell us how that came about?
Well, Japan approached me in 1905 and wanted me to negotiate an end to their war with Russia. We set about that task in a place called Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And in September 1905, the treaty was signed. And that is what they gave me the Nobel Prize for.
So we were involved with the treaty between the Russians and the Japanese.
Yes, we
in that treaty. How did that affect us, the United States?
Well, the Treaty of Portsmouth brought the United States to the forefront in world diplomacy. The world saw that we could be a peacemaker. However, the Japanese Empire never trusted us again. And it brought in an era of competition between us and the Japanese Empire in the Pacific region. Later on, I also solved a dispute between Germany and France on the division of Morocco.
So you were definitely.
I tried.
One of your biggest accomplishments, Mr. President, was that when the French gave up the Panama Canal, you got the U.S. involved. how did this come about, and what were the reasons you felt that the United States was in the, to have the canal was in the best interest of the United States?
Well, we always needed a shorter route from east to west and west to east. So I figured it was in our best interest, especially for our Navy, to be able to get from ocean to ocean quickly instead of having to navigate Cape Horn. The French failed in 1895 basically because of disease and the fact that they wanted a sea level canal, which meant they would have to dig massive, massive amounts of rock out in order to attain a level. We went in and decided to use a lock system which raised the ships on one side and then lowered them on the other to the other ocean.
So one of the oceans is higher.
Yes, Atlantic is higher.
The Atlantic is higher.
So you had to sail in, lower them to the Pacific, and vice versa, sail in, raise them to the Atlantic.
And what was the trip, you talked about the Cape Horn, how big of a trip was that?
It's roughly 8,000 nautical miles.
I can see why the canal was a very important
Yes, it was. Yes, it
for
was.
the United States. Were there any environmental or medical breakthroughs resulting from the work done in the Panama Canal?
The main environmental issue is the time saved from the trip around Cape Horn. Medical-wise, we determined that malaria and yellow fever were mosquito-borne illnesses, and we set about wiping out the mosquitoes. We completely eradicated yellow fever and learned to control malaria. We cleared massive amounts of forests. We installed municipal water systems so the people there did not have to collect rainwater to drink. We fumigated. We sprayed the swamps with kerosene to kill the breeding grounds for the mosquitoes. It was a massive undertaking, but it worked.
We understand that you ran for president in 1912, having broken your word to the American public in 1904, that you would never run again. Can you explain why you broke your word?
Well, that ne'er-do-well, William Howard Taft again, was never long on leadership capabilities. So I felt that the way things were going, we needed a strong leader in the White House to run the country because he was a total failure. He meant well, but he meant well feebly.
Yeah, we didn't care for him.
Not a bit, no. Totally useless man. And fat to boot.
Is it true, Mr. President, that you were shot in an attempted assassination and still gave your speech? That's unheard of.
October 1912, I was going to give a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A deranged saloon keeper who thought that the ghost of William McKinley was telling him that I needed to be assassinated shot me. It went through my glass case, through my folded speech, and lodged in my right chest. Well, I calmed the crowd so they didn't lynch the ruffian. And since I wasn't coughing blood, I knew I would be all right, so I went in and gave my speech. I think it lasted roughly 90 minutes. Now, one of the first things I told my audience was, I think you can see that I've just been shot. However, It takes more than that to stop a bull moose.
Is it true, sir, that your son Teddy Jr. and you are the only one of two father's sons who have received the Congressional Medal of Honor?
Yes.
Can you enlighten us on how that came about?
Well, they deemed I should have the Medal of Honor for my gallant actions at San Juan Hill. I was just doing my duty, but they gave it to me posthumously. I guess they didn't want to make me more famous than I was. Now, Ted was the only general officer to go ashore on D-Day in the initial assault, June 6, 1944. He was given the Medal of Honor for his gallant leadership of troops that morning while on the beach. Unfortunately, about a month later, he died in his sleep of a heart attack. And he and his brother, Quentin, are buried there in the American Cemetery at Normandy, side by side.
Well, I have one last question, sir. Appreciate all of your time and your explanation of some of the things in your life. But one of the things we'd like to really know about is what is with that teddy bear sitting next to you there?
Ah, the teddy bear. Well, you know, the teddy bear, after I settled a coal miner strike in 1902, I was worn out, and the governor of Mississippi invited me on a hunting trip there, which I gladly accepted. Now, they did not want me to be disappointed by not getting a bear, so they used dogs to chase one down, roped it, tied it to a tree, and then came and got me to dispatch the animal. Well, that's not sporting at all. I absolutely refused and walked away. The press that were with us at the time immediately reported it. A Washington Post cartoonist started drawing a cartoon bear that he called Teddy's Bear. A couple that ran a knick-knack company in New York, the lady made a teddy bear in the image of that cartoon, sent it to me for my grandchildren. They asked my permission to sell them, which I readily gave. And of course, strangely, the bear was more popular in Germany at the time. I can't explain that. But now this bear, one of you is going to take this bear home with you tonight. So, with your right hand, reach under your chair and feel and see if you have an envelope. If you have an envelope, read it. Congratulations, you own a teddy bear. Who's the lucky winner?
Come up and get your bear.
I hope you brought a wheelbarrow.
Now she's going to have to explain to her family why she's sleeping with Ted E. Bear.
Congratulations.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your time.
You're quite welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Roosevelt. And if you do not know him by, do not know him by name, Mike Owen. Mike Owen. And better known as Sandy Owen's husband. Do you have, before we go, do you have, anybody have any questions for Katy or for Jim Apple about our President Roosevelt?
I have enough.
Okay, one of the things that, as usual, we're gonna need some help from you strong young men to take down some of the tables on the dance floor. I'm sorry, question.
Raffle.
Oh, raffle. Oh, we were just gonna take the money and run.
Hang on one second.
Not up there.
Listen, I would like to give my appreciation to Michael Owen, because if